The year was 1964. One of Victoria's most famous nightclubs was the Club Tango on Oak Bay Avenue, above the theater. What was originally a hall for rent got transformed by Ed Hicks into a popular dinner dance club in the late 1950s, early 60s. Ian Dement purchased the club in 1961. With the era of the British music invasion well underway, what were once big bands and orchestras made way for the flurry of 4- and 5-piece groups of mop-top youngsters emulating the trends of the day. Folk music was also developing as its own musical genre, so when Bobby Faulds was surprised by an unexpected birthday party, it was natural that he, Jim Moody, and Bill Hodgson got together and sang up a storm.
Down by the riverside where I met my little bright-eyed dog. Down by
It was so successful they named themselves the Wayward Trio, and they took their trio to the Club Tango and asked the house band to back them up.
So the Wayward Trio, we became very, very popular, and it was through the Wayward Trio that we actually hired Dougie Edwards to play lead guitar behind us, and Terry Budd on the drums.
I went down there and, we started to play, and I wound up backing them up for, I don't know, a good year or so. Just Terry and I.
And then we eventually added Brian Newcomb.
He had asked me to come to a rehearsal to back up the Wayward Trio. And out of that, as Doug was saying, the Strangers evolved.
And of course, when Pete was still there, his brother-in-law was a trumpet player named Bill Stewart, and we thought maybe a little horn section might add something to it.
Brought my horn down one night at a bit of a jam session. I think I got lucky, and Dougie says, that's not too bad. So, and that's how we kind of started going.
So Bobby came along, and it just evolved into that little particular unit.
But how can these things can evolve? There's not one day we said, hey, we're going to get together and bang it happen. It was just evolved somehow.
We were getting gigs, partly because of who Bobby was, because he was so well known. And then we got a number of gigs with Bobby Faulds and the Strangers, and it just really started to come together, that group.
By 1965, the band was working all around Victoria and became known as Bobby Faulds and the Strangers. Playing regularly at the Club Tango, the Scope on View, in the old Sirocco building, and the Crystal Gardens, and many, many dances. Also in 1965 was the opening of the new Mayfair Mall, located on Douglas Street, at the site of the old Evans-Coleman Brickyard. And in an effort to promote Back to School, in August, they produced the Battle of the Bands at Center Court under the clock that ran for 2 days on Friday and Saturday, featuring 9 local groups and other bands coming from Duncan, Nanaimo, and Port Alberni.
Well, that was great, and that's a pretty good gig at Mayfair. Nice weather, too, outdoors, of course.
Well, there was a little prize at the end of it, which was a record, which was a real incentive in those days.
Yeah, winning the Battle of the Bands, it was funny, the headlines. It was Strangers First, Takes Fours Third was the headline, because the Take Fours were our rivals. They were a younger band doing more English stuff, and they were, they're a younger, maybe a little bit bigger fan base, so they were expected to win. But the judges saw the light.
They won the competition and were off to Vancouver to record their first vinyl on RCA Canada International, which produced their hit single, Walking Away.
You sing a song with an angel, my best friend the other now. Was she wearing diamond earrings?
But when we knew we wanted to record, we wanted to make at least some of it be original. So Bobby and Wes both contributed a couple of really good tunes.
We went to Vancouver. we got into a recording studio, we recorded the songs, and Bobby and I were working at Eaton's Record Bar at the time, as I recall. And I remember when it finally came out, and it's like, here's our record, and it was like, it was such a big deal for us,
I remember when it came out, somebody phoned me and said it was in the record department of Eaton's, but I think probably the first time I heard it was My Car. That is probably one of the biggest kicks you could ever have, particularly because not only was our group, but my name was on one of the sides as a writer, so I thoroughly enjoyed that.
I remember we were trying to come up with a manager just to take us to the next level, and I remember having a meeting over in Oak Bay, some guy's house, and anyways, it never really came together, and so we were kind of just treading water at that time, and Doug decided to leave Victoria and go to Vancouver to expand his career.
Well, it wasn't really that much longer after that I kind of decided I had to get out of town.
And from there, I sort of built onto the band and made a bigger band from the Strangers that we had, the original Strangers, where we formed the new Strangers, which eventually became the Canadians. Barry Casson on drums. We had, to start with, Brian Newcomb with the old Strangers. Then we got Mike Steinmetz with the new Strangers.
Doug was already over in Vancouver by then, and mid-end of June, I got a call from him say, hey, there's a club over here that needs a bass player. Do you want to come over? And
we had Dougie Edwards replaced by David Foster, and of course the brass section was Wes Chambers, Rich England, and Billy Stewart. And I was doing the vocals.
I was in London for 6 weeks just checking the scene out, and it was so cool over there. There was so much happening. I thought, God, we got to be here, So I came back and I said to the guys, it's hot, we should get our asses over there and get something going.
1966, there wasn't much future for professional musicians in Canada. They hadn't put in the Canada Content Act on the radio and television. So it was either go to the States or where else was it happening in those days? Well, it was happening in the UK.
We figured that's where we've got to head. We've got to head over to England.
A few member changes ensued, and Mike Steinmetz, David Foster, and Rich England joined the group, and they headed to the United Kingdom as the Canadian Strangers.
And we finally got to London, and we stayed with Bobby's relatives up in Leicestershire there.
Eventually, we ended up in London auditioning for a major agent, direct producer down there named Roy Tempest, who pretty well controlled the music, pop music in Britain at that time. You went through him or you didn't work.
Actually, Roy Tempest was the biggest booking agency in Europe at the time. And once you went with this guy, then you played all the so-called better places, But we worked pretty hard. We used to do 4 gigs a night, and only 4 gigs a night, 4 different cities.
He worked us too hard, and he put us as a backing group for all the top American bands, like Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, Edwin Starr, Benny King, the Drifters, Spellbinders, you name it. We had it all down. They were top acts. And we traveled, to France and all through Europe with and Britain with Chuck Berry and all these artists.
They had a system over there of clubs, and they're called all-nighters. And that literally is what they do. And we had one night where we worked 6 shows from 6 o'clock at night till 6 o'clock in the morning.
It was too bad. It was very difficult for everybody because the pressure was on, certainly the guys that were married, we had to make it in a period of time. Otherwise, the wives, and that's really understandable.
The 3 horn players, we all had families back here, kids, so we weren't allowed to send money back, and it was getting kind of tough back here, so we decided, well, it was time, we were just going to have to pack it up, so we came back.
So it was sad because, well, the brass section, Rich and Wes and Billy, they were all married at the time, and it was pretty hard for them to be away from their wives for so long. So, and they had sort of like given it the 6 months or the however long it was to make it during that time.
It seemed like we were just getting written up in the Melody Maker magazine. You know, you see a little thing, congratulations to the Cavern for snapping up the Canadian Strangers, you know, but we just couldn't hold it together.
And the group disbanded and returned to Canada. And although the story of the Strangers had ended, it was the beginning for many to move forward in their lives, and most of them musically, all with successful careers.
You say you saw them by the fountain.